Great. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Sawsville, and you're joining Vermont Coverts as we host Keith Thompson, the Private Lands Program Manager with the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks, and Recreation. Keith is a great person to work with, and I'm really excited to have him on with us tonight. He's going to talk to us about the Use Value Appraisal Program and able to answer your questions. When it comes to questions, I ask that you type them in the chat box, and I'll relay them to Keith at the end. And also, I'm happy to, if we need a follow-up, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and you can further ask the question if it comes down to that. Keep your microphones on mute so we don't have any background noise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith and let him tell us a little bit about himself and jump right into sharing with us about the Use Value Appraisal Program here in Vermont.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. And thank you everybody for joining for the presentation. I am really excited to get to the questions, but I won't rush us there. As Lisa said, this is a presentation on the Use Value Appraisal Program. And folks also know it as UVA and current use, land use. Presenting on this because I work with the Department of Forests, Parks, and Recreation as the Private Lands Program Manager. It means that I coordinate the work of the county foresters within the department who deliver the program throughout the state and provide the direct assistance to landowners and do a lot of the evaluation of eligibility and review of management plans. And we'll get into that later on in the presentation. Background, I grew up in Waterbury, worked as a consulting forester after graduating from UVM for several years, and then was Chittenden County Forester for several years before stepping into this role in about 2015. It's a really cool job and feel really just proud to have the opportunity to do the work with the Use Value Appraisal Program because I feel like it's one of the most important programs for private landowners and forests in the state, and we'll get into why that is. But with that, we'll dive in. The Use Value Appraisal Program, for all the good it does, is also very detailed. There's a huge amount of investment in the state going into the program, and some of this, for better or worse, is detailed and kind of gets into that. But I'll just dive right in. So this presentation, we're going to cover kind of an introduction to the program and the purposes of the program, looking at the history of the program and some overview of it. And then we're going to work into program details, eligibility, obligations and responsibilities of enrolled landowners, and then move into questions. My hope is that we'll probably spend nearly half the time discussing questions. Do find that that's where the best benefit is. There is a lot of confusion among landowners and the public about what the current use program is or what use value appraisal program is. There will be a lot of folks who say, oh, we're in the land trust or something like that. Just want to make the clear distinction. When people reference land use, current use, use value, or use value appraisal, we're talking about this program, which is established in statute for enrollment of properties and reduction of taxes through the program. That is distinct from the land trust, Vermont Land Trust, or other organizations that provide conservation easement and a different level of protection for private lands. The program started in 1980. Its statutory purpose is to preserve the working landscape and the rural character of Vermont. There are multiple elements to this: keeping Vermont's agricultural and forest land in production, protecting natural ecological systems, preventing accelerated conversion to development, to achieve equitable taxation, assist in preservation and protection of scenic resources, and assist in Vermonters assist Vermonters in planned and orderly growth. At the time it was created in 1980, it took off pretty quick. And this is a chart here of the growth of enrollments over time. This is available in Property Valuation and Review's annual report. They produce it every year for the legislature. And you can see how quickly it's grown. The solid line on top is the total acres of enrollment. The dashed line in the middle are the forest land acres, and the dotted line at the bottom are enrollment of agricultural acres. You can see that the enrollment of forest land has continuously grown over time. Agricultural land does continue to grow, but is generally leveled off, certainly since 2000. So total enrollments today for forest land, which is where the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation is most involved, is about 1.95 million acres, and about 16,000 parcels across the state are enrolled in the forest land category of the program. Additionally, there's about 40,000 acres of conservation land among 190 parcels, and I'll get into those categories as well, and about 550,000 acres of agricultural land among 3,000 parcels. Since 2003, there's been about a 43% increase in enrollments, and with 1.4 million acres enrolled in 2003 in forest land and 2 million acres today. Parcels, on the other hand, there's been a 70% increase, with 9,000 parcels enrolled in 2003 and 16,000 today. The reason for that is a couple reasons. The increasingly smaller parcels are enrolling. And at the same time, some of the larger parcels do subdivide. And so when the subdivision occurs, there can be an increase in number of parcels enrolled without an increase in the total acreage. This map here is a map of the forest land and the forest land enrolled and the potentially eligible forest land parcels. And this is new as of this year. And I apologize for folks who are colorblind. I wasn't sensitive to that potential in creating the map, but the green on the map are UVA enrolled forest land parcels, and the pink are potentially eligible parcels. There are 55% of the eligible forest land parcels are enrolled, while about 70% of eligible forest acres are enrolled. And the reason for that, when kind of crunching the numbers, you can, it gets pretty clear that almost all of the parcels over 500 acres are enrolled in the program, whereas there are huge numbers of smaller parcels that would be eligible, 25 acres, 50 acres, that are not enrolled. So this is a picture of what it looks like on the state level, and there's clearly a high density of enrollment. As you zoom in, it certainly varies by town, but you can see that in many places there are large contiguous blocks of enrollments, but there are also gaps. And this is just a screenshot taken from Vermont Natural Resource Atlas. You can go online, look at the UVA enrolled parcels that are all mapped as of this year. The difference in coloration among these parcels is that the dark brown are parcels that are enrolled in the agricultural category, while the tan are those parcels that are enrolled in the forest land category. Recognizing that such a huge swath of the state is enrolled in the program, it's important to consider what the benefits of the program are. This is a chart that illustrates the difference between landowners enrolled in the current use program and landowners not enrolled in the current use program, and whether or not they have a management plan or received advice, have benefited from cost share. This was a study that was conducted by the U.S. Forest Service at the state's request. They were able to focus on some of these details and illustrate just the huge differential between landowners with management plans, advice, cost share, easements, green certification, that those that are enrolled in current use by all of these metrics are far higher among landowners who are enrolled in the current use program. It's difficult to say if this is a cause or effect relationship or if there's a correlation among landowners that tend to enroll in the program and pursue these same avenues to be engaged. But nevertheless, there's a strong correlation between landowners enrolled in the program and landowners who take some of these important steps to take care of their land and understand how to manage it well. So with that, we'll jump into some of the enrollment categories of the UVA program. There are three main enrollment categories: agricultural land and conservation land, which I'll cover briefly at the beginning, and then spend the rest of the presentation discussing forest land. But before we do that, we'll talk about how the program works financially for landowners. What's the incentive for being enrolled? Basically, land that's enrolled in use value gets assessed at the use value of the enrollment category of the land that's enrolled. So if land is enrolled as forest land, the assessment on that enrolled land is $152 per acre, as compared to whatever the town's tax rate would be for that land, which often $1,000, $2,000 an acre. Agricultural land has a different use value. It's $405, and every year these values change. And here's a chart illustrating how they've changed over time. They do tend to increase. Looking back to 2009, the use value for forest land was $123 per acre, while in 2021 it was $152. Over on the agricultural land value, $199 per acre in 2009 and $405 in 2021. This central column, forest land value for lands greater than 1 mile from road per acre. Statute basically established that there'd be a different use value for lands that were really far from access, given the additional cost of managing those lands. And so these values are basically just 75% of whatever the forest land value is within the same year. To look at what the potential savings are and focusing on the forest land enrollments, with 100 acres enrolled, $152 per acre is the assessment on those 100 acres. The total tax at a 2% tax rate, or the total value of the land, would be $15,200. At a 2% tax rate, the annual tax for those 100 acres would be $304. For the same parcel that is valued at $1,000 per acre, the total value of that land would be $100,000, and the total tax would be $2,000. And so the savings on this example parcel would be $1,696 annually. When a parcel is enrolled in the program, a lien gets put on the property, and it goes into the future. There's no end date for that. And so landowners who enroll and intend to stay enrolled can continue to realize those savings annually. To look at some of the eligibility, as I said before, we'll talk about agricultural land briefly, conservation land briefly, and then dig into the forest land in a little bit more depth. Agricultural land is eligible for farmers or lands with certain acreage that's actively managed for agriculture. To be a farmer, landowners got to have 50% of their income from farming. And to demonstrate that, they've got to supply tax returns to property valuation review. That's what PVR stands for. And if one's not a farmer, but they're leasing land to a farmer, that land can be enrolled as agricultural land. Also, if there's more than 25 acres of actively managed agricultural land, some of those other criteria don't need to apply. But if it's less, and the person is not a farmer, if they can demonstrate that they're generating $2,000 per year from the farm unit, the enrolled acreage, then that land can be enrolled as agricultural land. That side of the current use program is administered by property valuation review. FPR doesn't deal with many of the administrative aspects of that, but because there's certainly going to be some agricultural enrolled land with some of the forest land parcels, it is something that we deal with at times. Folks who are enrolling agricultural land should be aware that there's a annual agricultural certification that each landowner is mailed and they need to return either by mail or they can submit it electronically. That basically ensures that they are attesting to the continued eligibility as agricultural land. When landowners are enrolling agricultural land, if there's no forest land, the map is required, but no additional management plan is required. We'll get into this a little bit, the administrative pieces, but there's no county forester equivalent for ag land. County foresters, the employees with Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, do a lot of work to help assist landowners navigate the program and the requirements, but there's no equivalent in the for the ag land category, and so often landowners can contact property valuation review or a county forester if they've got questions. In addition to land being eligible, there are farm buildings that can be eligible. At times, it can be difficult to make a distinction between what is in fact eligible and what is not. And if there are questions, folks should contact property valuation review. In this image, the buildings on the left are bona fide agricultural buildings. The building on the right is a wedding venue. And just to be clear, that wouldn't be eligible as a farm building. Conservation land is an enrollment category, and it's eligible for enrollment when it's owned by a 501c3 that's in the business of conserving land and has been functioning for a period of 5 years. The tax department keeps track of organizations that are eligible for enrollment of land in this category. And in addition to that, the parcel needs to be certified by the tax department as being eligible for enrollment. On land enrolled in the conservation category, it needs to be managed for conservation purposes. We'll get into the details of how that differs from the forest land category, but land enrolling in the conservation land category, and examples would be like Nature Conservancy, Vermont Land Trust, many other local land trusts around the state have land enrolled in this category. they do need to be managed for conservation goals according to a forest management plan and specific standards for the program. When a parcel enrolls in the program, there are some portions of many parcels that won't be eligible. Dwellings need to have 2 acres excluded, that won't be eligible. Lawns aren't eligible. Wide power lines aren't eligible, and so somebody can depict their land, and they'll say, you know, of these 100 acres, I'm going to take out these 2 acres around the house and these 1.5 acres along the power line, and then those acres get valued separately, and then the savings would be applied to the enrolled land in the way that we described earlier. With that, we'll jump into the forest land eligibility pieces. And this is really where the rubber meets the road with much of the program. As I mentioned before, with 70% of Vermont's eligible land enrolled in the program, a huge amount of the work that we're looking to occur on our forest land, whether it be cleaning water, providing wildlife habitat, providing connectivity, providing forest products, recreational opportunities, etc., is occurring on this UVA enrolled forest land. And so as I'm describing a bunch of these eligibility requirements and standards, that good stuff that the great values that we depend on from our forest land is something that needs to be compatible and occur through these on these lands that are also meeting these requirements. So for forest land to be eligible, parcel needs to be at least 25 acres with a minimum of 20 acres of productive managed forests. And so, for example, if a property is 25 acres, but there's also 2 acres around a house that's not eligible, they don't meet that 25 acre threshold. So if it's a parcel that has a house, it's got to be 27 acres so that there can be the minimum of 25 acres of enrolled land. Management on enrolled forest land properties is approved by FPR, needs to be consistent with a forest management plan and map meeting acceptable standards. The standards are established by the Commissioner of the Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation. And then there are some subcategories within the forest land category, I'll get to that in a little bit, that don't require timber management to be the primary management objective. And then all site forest lands, think wetlands, kind of the top of this mountain or so, something like that, that can't produce saw timber, they are eligible when all other eligibility conditions are met. So when we're talking about UVA and the enrollment categories, if you look at statute, there's basically the two main categories. There is agricultural land and managed forest land. Then beneath managed forest land, there's conservation land, and then all these other subcategories. And I'm going to dig into some of those other subcategories. By and far and away, productive forest land is the most commonly used enrollment category. This is applicable to lands that are actively used for managing for saw timber, among other goals. It's most of our landscape is in these conditions. Other subcategories might include significant wildlife habitat. Places that might be eligible for significant wildlife habitat would be heron rookeries, or vernal pools, or mast stands, things like that. And then special places and sensitive sites might be eschers, kind of unique geological features, heritage sites for for Native Americans, or things like that. Lands not managed actively for saw timber. These are areas that need to be substantiated in a forest management plan and mapped. The ecologically significant treatment areas, also called ESTAs, are a suite of subcategories that are associated with unique ecological conditions that landowners can demonstrate occur on their properties. And when they do that, they don't need to be managed for saw timber, but they do need to be managed for the values that the ecological values that they provide. And so these include natural communities of statewide significance, rare, threatened, and endangered species, riparian areas, so areas along streams, wetlands, things like that. Vernal pools with documented amphibian breeding habitat, forested wetlands, and old forests. In addition, there's a miscellaneous category that allows for up to 1 acre for a legitimate conservation objective, and that rarely gets used, but it's basically if there's something wildly unique on your parcel that you don't want to be managing for saw timber that warrants protection, you could substantiate that in the management plan and map that and kind of carve that out from the obligation to manage for saw timber. I'd mentioned the site for soils. So again, this is an area where obviously not going to grow any trees. It's a really special site. These can be enrolled without a limit on how many acres are enrolled on the parcel. The same enrollment category would be used for enrolling wetlands. Also not good for growing trees or managing for saw timber, but hugely important for our landscape and eligible for that reason. In addition, open land or open idle ag land is eligible, and these are areas that have a limited area that can be enrolled. Up to 20% of the total productive soils on the land can be enrolled in this category. So there is a cap on it. But this wouldn't be lawns or croquet courts, but would apply to a field of goldenrod that gets brush hogged once every couple of years, or places that are being managed for pollinator habitat or shrub habitat for birds that are dependent on those conditions. So a portion of each parcel can be enrolled in that category. And then there can be a combination of all these enrollment categories on a single parcel. In this example, we've got northern hardwood, forest area 1. In one portion of the property, we've got a section of riparian esta around a stream. Over here on the eastern side, the southern area is more productive forest land in area 2. Then we've got some open land along the roads. And then up here on the western side, we've got some excluded land around the house site. So a lot of properties look like this with a combination of various enrollment categories within the same parcel, and a management plan that's submitted for a parcel would reflect each of these conditions and describe how they're being managed. So a forest management plan is necessary for every property that's enrolled in the forest land category. Forest land needs to be subject to the plan. It's submitted by October 1st of the year after enrollment. It takes effect on April 1st of the following year, and it's in effect for 10 years. And the plan needs to describe each of the various conditions, generally prepared by a private licensed consulting forester. It would describe the long-term management goals for the property, and then describe the forest conditions, objectives, and include a map and a schedule of treatments for achieving those long-term management goals. And after the 10 years expires, or after that management plan expires, 10 years after it's written, a new one needs to be in place prior to the expiration of that. So every April 1st, as I mentioned, there are about 16,000 parcels enrolled in the program. Every April 1st, a new round of plans is due from the various landowners whose plans are expiring. And so we're receiving between 1,500 and 1,900 management plans annually that our county foresters review against the standards, make sure that parcels are being managed according to the requirements, and then those plans, once approved, will remain in effect for the following 10 years. Landowners that are enrolled in the program have some ongoing responsibilities. They've got to ensure that the management on the parcel follows the management plan. Every time there's forest management activity, they need to submit a forest management activity report. In the past, it used to be called an annual conformance report, and whether you did any activity or not, you had to submit one of these. That's not the case anymore. You've only got to submit one when activity occurs. Recent changes to this, we've begun requiring that lands that are managed for sap production need to report the number of taps on the parcel. They don't need to do it annually. Once they report the total number of taps, they don't need to do that again until the total number of taps changes. But that's a new requirement. It can also be submitted online now. That started a couple of years. In addition, each enrolled property is inspected periodically by the county forester to ensure that what is written in the management plan is being done on the ground. When thinking about what goes into a forest management plan, each plan needs to articulate how it's being managed for forest products. But how that is occurring should be aligned with the landowner's goals. Management for recreation, aesthetics, wildlife, water quality, they're all compatible with timber management. And working with a forester to ensure that they understand your management objectives and help you understand what is being prescribed on the property and how that management will both satisfy the requirements of the current use program and advance your landowner objectives is hugely important. I think that the foresters, the consulting foresters throughout the state do an incredible job. But like any relationship, there are situations where there's not a great match between a landowner and a consulting forester. And I really encourage landowners to spend the time talking with a consulting forester and even shopping around to make sure that they find somebody who spends the time to listen to their needs, their management objectives, and is going to be effective at realizing those objectives on the land. In addition to helping landowners realize their goals and their management objectives, I think it's really important to recognize the potential value of active management to restore forest conditions. Land use history, invasive plants, things like that, and can really undermine the forest health and integrity. And there are certain management tools that can really help restore these conditions. And forest management plans can be an incredible way to help identify where those conditions exist and articulate strategies to address them. I really encourage landowners and foresters alike to not just see these things as unfortunate legacies of the past, but also take responsibility as the stewards of that land for the moment to do right by the land in ways that hasn't been done in the past. Do some of that restoration so it can be in better shape for the future. Each forest management plan to kind of build on the landowner's objectives or restore past harms is going to be built on these kind of foundational blocks. It's going to include a property summary. The plan's going to have parcel resource information about streams, wetlands, things like that. It's going to describe the stands, and the stands are in that map that we looked at earlier. There was a northern hardwood stand and a spruce fir stand. Basically, they're portions of the parcel of unique forest conditions that can be described and managed in a similar way. And so each parcel will have one or more forest stands on it. And then associated with each of those stands will be management prescriptions. These management prescriptions will describe that based on these landowner objectives and these conditions, here is the proposed management to achieve those goals. And associated with every plan are maps. And we showed one before, here's another one. Each plan or each map, excuse me, needs to meet a certain set of standards. And because of the scale of this, this is hard to see, but generally speaking, there's in the lower left-hand corner, there's a acreage chart describing how each enrollment category, the acreage of each enrollment category. In the center is the illustration of the parcel and the delineation of each of the respective portions of the parcel and how they're enrolled. In the upper right is a locus map illustrating where on the landscape this parcel is. Then there's a scale bar, a couple of legends, and then there's a title block saying who owns the land, who prepared the map, and so on. And there's a specific set of standards that each map needs to be prepared to. And so once you started to see some of these maps, there are a lot of similarities. As far as ongoing responsibilities, there's a need to stay enrolled. And to do that, you got to meet the management standards. AMPs, these are the acceptable management practices for protecting water quality on forest land in Vermont. There are standards that establish how you can cross a stream, what sizes bridges and culverts need to be relative to whether or not they're intermittent or year-round streams. There are also requirements for how you establish water bars to divert water off the road, and how frequently, given a specific slope, water bars need to be in place. And these standards are written based on a lot of research that identifies basically how you protect water quality and protect against erosion on logging operations. Then the other major piece is making sure that you don't do activity that isn't prescribed in the management plan, and you do the activity that is prescribed in the management plan. If the AMPs aren't implemented, there are real environmental costs that affect everybody. And there are real implications, practical implications to a parcel in terms of continued access. Roads can wash out and they can be really hard and expensive to repair. And in addition, if a parcel gets removed from the program, that can be really costly, and I'll dig into that. And so implementing the AMPs is really critical for landowners. and then making sure that the harvesting that's prescribed is what is in fact done. This illustration or this picture here isn't just illustrating that there was aggressive logging, but this was a parcel where no activity was prescribed, and this was the result. And this parcel was removed from the program as a result of this harvesting. As I mentioned, there are inspections that the county foresters do each year. They do about 1,000 inspections, and they go out to the property, and ideally they go out with the landowner. They take a look at the woods. They document what was scheduled for management activity, and they keep track of whether or not that was conducted, and they provide input on whether or not the requirements are being met. That's the real kind of logistical aspect of it, but this is also where some of the real educational benefits and growth occurs, both among county foresters and landowners, where most of the learning occurs during these visits. While there is a formal role of the inspection and the administration of the program, it's also the chance for a landowner and a consulting forester to get out on the ground, talk about what the landowner is excited about in their woods, and hear from the consulting forester how that might be achieved best. If a county forester finds that that management hasn't been conducted according to the requirements, then they can file a cut contrary, an adverse inspection report on that parcel. That would be an administrative removal from the program. Outside of that, though, if a landowner is recognizing, hey, I enrolled in the program a while back, it's really not the right thing for me anymore, and that might be true for a variety of reasons. There are ways to withdraw. There's voluntary withdrawal, and one example in which the lien would remain in place. Basically, the land is still eligible for enrollment, but they just don't want to keep it enrolled in the program. They can remove it, and as long as it remains forest or agricultural land, it's not developed, then the lien remains, but there's no penalty. They'll just go back to normal taxation. If the landowner says, hey, not only do I not want to be enrolled, but I want to develop some or all of my land, they can withdraw a specific portion of their property and pay the land use change tax, which is 10% of the fair market value of the land that's being withdrawn. And then they can develop that land, and in many cases, the remainder of the land will stay enrolled. There can be removals from the program administratively in ways that aren't voluntary for the landowner. If the landowner doesn't maintain eligibility, doesn't confirm eligibility for the agricultural category, and in some cases there are erroneous enrollments as well. And if a landowner or if the department finds that land is cut contrary to the forest management plan, then not only does the land that was cut contrary to the plan get removed, but the entire parcel is removed and it won't be considered for re-enrollment for a period of 5 years. Land use change tax is levied on the acreage that was cut contrary. Fortunately, this is really not frequent. Generally 5 to 10 parcels a year are removed in this way. But when it occurs, it can be extremely costly for the landowner, and it's really a sad outcome both for the landowner and the parcel and the land as well. But fortunately, that's not the outcome in most situations. In most situations, lands enrolled in the program are growing trees, supporting wildlife, producing clean water across Vermont's landscape, and providing huge returns for everybody. And I think, as reflecting on that map at the beginning of the presentation, as we look across the landscape up on a mountaintop or something like that, we can appreciate that a huge amount of that land is enrolled in this program and benefiting from the reduced cost of owning that land and making it more affordable to own it and maintain it in that condition. And I think we all benefit from that. So that was a whirlwind. There's a lot there. And with the time we've got left, love to jump into some questions. Lisa, you're muted.
That doesn't help. Thanks, Keith. Okay, great. There are some questions in the chat box. I'll go ahead and read those, and people can continue to type them in if they have any. The first question is from Matt. He says, my property looks much like your 38-acre example. Please elaborate on the use of a forester to write the management plan. I have found paying for a consulting forester for such a small plan puts an overbearing expense on the smallest of the potentially enrollable parcels.
Sure. Would it be best if I stop sharing, or does it matter?
Yeah, it's nice to kind of get everybody populated there. So
all right, let's do that.
There you go.
All right, Matt. It's a great question. So every forest management plan needs to meet a certain suite of standards. And forest management plans to approach them effectively requires an inventory of the forest land, requires mapping, things like that. And looking back at that example, the 100-acre parcel, which was saving $1,700 a year through enrollment. I found in most parcels that are enrolling, and I'm not saying that hiring a forester is not a significant expense. It is. It's going to be, for a 38-acre parcel, it's going to be $1,000 or more in most cases. I also expect that the savings in most cases, and it may vary among parcels, is generally going to be in that area annually. Every year, I've found that most management plans, the cost of a management plan is offset in the first year, sometimes 2 years. So it doesn't mean that it's a small amount, but it is what is necessary usually to meet the requirements of the program. And given the number of landowners and parcels that are enrolled, it's turned out that for many, it really works well. And it also ensures that the investments that the state puts towards the program are well invested.
I have a little skin in the game.
Yeah.
But also I'll point out, I don't know if you mentioned, sometimes depending on the year, NRCS has money to help support the writing of a forest management plan. So your local NRCS office, if that's something that you want, you can see if that's a priority at this time and it involves an application. It's usually a cost share where you pay some and they pay some, but it does bring down the personal cost of the forest management plan for the landowner.
And it usually takes advance notice. It can take longer to apply and get funded for those than often landowners. Usually, there are times where a landowner will lose a year,
Right.
And in which case they just say, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and do this because I'm going to save more money by being enrolled in the program than by getting NRCS funds. But for
Right.
folks who are able to plan ahead, it's a great approach. And I'd also recommend shop around. There are consultants who will do plans for different prices, but recognizing, like I said before, make sure that you hire somebody that's going to work well for you. Saving a few bucks will not offset the benefit of hiring a good forester who works well for you.
There was a question though, can a landowner do their own plan? Is that possible? Will it still be approved at this point?
A landowner can do their own plan, technically.
Right.
In my experience, I have frankly never seen a plan come through that met standards, that was prepared by a landowner without a huge amount of work. And at times, recognizing that there are 1,900 forest management plans that came through this year, it's not something that we're able to shepherd along with a huge amount of assistance, unfortunately. We wish we could.
Right. So we have a question on ESTAs. What's involved in getting an area approved as an ESTA? And if it is approved, is it possible to change that designation in the future?
Yes. So land, I'll start at the end of the question. Land that is enrolled as an ESTA can be disenrolled from an ESTA condition into another eligible category. Land that is not enrolled as an ESTA can transition into an ESTA enrollment. So if it's productive forest land today, it could be enrolled as a riparian area tomorrow. And then wait a second, I don't want to do that. I'm going to turn it back into productive forest land. Doing that over a course of 2 days would be a huge waste of time, but you could do it. And what is necessary really depends on what the enrollment category is. Some of them are more involved than others. Natural communities that have been mapped by the state can be reasonably documented by referring to the state's mapping and described in the plan. If a natural community has not been mapped by the state and is being mapped by the consulting forester or landowner, then they need to meet a certain set of standards when describing that natural community. Riparian areas are much simpler. Generally, they're associated with surface waters and some distance from that surface water. They do need to be described, but there's not the same formal requirements for enrollment of those. And checking out the use value appraisal manual articulates all the standards for forest management plans and enrollment of ecologically significant treatment areas.
Another question has to do with other kind of uses. It says there seems to be a focus on merchantable timber, productive forests. This landowner grows mushrooms in the understory using tree resources to do so, and it doesn't seem to be ag allowable or forest. Is there anywhere that can be?
There are a lot of landowners that grow mushrooms in UVA enrolled forest land. And so I think that if growing mushrooms alone confers eligibility, I think the answer is generally going to be no. Though I think that the ag requirements could be considered further, and that would be based on the income generation. But there are a lot of landowners who manage for saw timber and in the understory are growing shiitakes and things like that. But like I said, that alone wouldn't establish eligibility.
Speaking of like ag and forestry and crossover, someone would like to know how sugaring is classified.
Sure. Sugaring is eligible in either the agricultural enrollment category or the forest management category. Most sugar bushes in the state are enrolled in the forest land category. There's a lower assessment for forest land, and generally sugar bush managers recognize the value of good forest management and might as well get the better tax savings while they're at it. So the vast majority of sugar makers are enrolled in the forest land category.
Steve wants to know if there are sources of funding for improvements made consistent with recreational goals in a forest management plan, like bridges, for example.
If there are if there's an intersection, I would say it could be compatible with recreational goals, but to my knowledge on private land, I'm not aware of major funding sources for recreational improvements. But there are there's NRCS funding for stream crossing practices and things like that that align closely with timber management practices and things like that. So there may be ways to support compatible use in that way. But I think that would be a good question for our recreation division, because I do know that there is funding available for recreational stuff, but I haven't seen it used as frequently on UVA enrolled lands.
What's neat, not for permanent bridges, but for people who are doing logging, I know that there's the portable skidder bridges that are available to landowners through a program with the department, right? So if they're doing logging on their property and they have a stream to cross, they can get a use of that portable skidder bridge.
There are some there are portable skidder bridges, wooden bridges for crossing with skidders. We also have, in the past few years, we've got 2 steel bridges, 40-foot log truck steel bridges that are portable, which is really crazy to see get installed and it's $100 to rent one. So
well, worth it to protect that stream bed.
Absolutely.
Let's see, can a property be enrolled in current use if it also has an arrangement with an organization like VLT? So if it's under easement with the land trust?
Yes, and in fact, most properties with a Vermont land trust easement, which are generally working lands easements, are enrolled in use value appraisal. So basically, if you can meet the standards of the program, managing actively for saw timber, not developing the enrolled land, and so on, then if there's an easement or not, it's not considered in the eligibility. There are some examples where easements preclude management that is required. So if there's a forever wild easement on a property which says no management ever, then because the UVA program requires active management, those properties are precluded from enrollment in the program.
Great. Q wants to know if there are any consultants who can assist in getting conservation status. He's the treasurer for a nonprofit that owns land and has a management plan for conservation and recreational use.
Yes, so there are several consulting firms that have prepared plans for conservation organizations. And I think I would start by saying, reach out to me tomorrow and shoot me an email, and we can talk about what that process looks like.
And I just typed your email into the chat box, so
Great.
it should be able to find
that
that.
offer goes to anybody who's got questions as well.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions, so if anybody has a question, I'll give you another minute to type it in the chat box. John had one, but I'm not sure if I understood it. So he says, is there financial support to put in a permanent bridge? You mentioned that for recreational purposes, it's another category. What about a bridge used for forest management purposes? He has a stream on his property that needs to get across all the time, so it would be a permanent bridge.
Yeah,
I think I got that right.
Yeah, it's not nearly as common. I think that if there's a water quality issue or something like that, there are instances where NRCS might be able to fund something like that, or find other sources. But I've got the same situation on my own property. So if you find some funding for that, let me know.
Well, that's great. Well, it seems like we've gotten most of the questions answered. I will say that for those of you that are not Coverts cooperators, we offer a 3-day training. We're hoping to go back in person in 2022. that talks about forest management, wildlife connectivity, habitat. We touch on current use, invasives, how to hire a consulting forester, and what to look for, and that shopping around. So those are all part of our cooperator training. So go ahead and check out our website. I'll throw that in the chat as well. And you can sign up for our e-news if you aren't already getting it. And we share our own programs as well as programs for other organizations around Vermont that are of interest to landowners. So we'd love to have you get on there and check that out. Let's see. Oh, that's a great question. A great question to finish on, actually, because every year there seems to be. Are there any information on anticipated changes to the use value program that are either in front of the legislature or that the department would like to see or wouldn't like to see?
Well, I think some of the things that we're working on that we're really looking forward to probably is really boring to the average person. But as you saw that steep line of growth of enrollments, we've got the same number of people administering the program since we had in 1945. So there has not been a comparable growth in capacity, while there's been a significant growth in the program. And so we're really trying to figure out how do we accommodate that growth and continue to effectively support landowners and foresters working to keep enrolling folks in the program without more capacity. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to get smart about how we engage landowners, notify them of activity that's occurring, keep them abreast of when their management plan updates are due so that they can plan ahead. Give them access to the forest management plans. As simple as it sounds, there are a lot of landowners who are enrolled who are like, oh, I've got a forest management plan? I didn't know. And part of that is that you create a forest management plan. Many say there's no activity and they forget about it for year after year until they get nudged again. And keeping that on folks' radar is important. And part of that is accessibility to materials. And so we're looking to make plans available to consulting foresters and landowners online. And in the past year, in fact, we're almost at the 1 year anniversary of starting digitization of all the plans and maps for all the enrolled parcels. And we just finished doing that this month. So all the plans and maps have been digitized. We're looking to create a portal to make those accessible and allow folks to submit them online. I saw John follow up on interest in the legislature and allowing other management objectives in addition to timber management to be allowable on UVA enrolled land. Or I think more than that, not just in addition to timber management, but to allow parcels to be enrolled without timber management. And there's strong interest in among some legislators to allow for that. And the example I gave before of parcels with a forever wild easement not being eligible is one example of that, where there's a sense that that's valuable on the landscape and there should be a way for those landowners to be eligible. Other examples are that Vermont's landscape used to be all old forest, big trees, diverse forest, a lot of structure, and most of it's not that today. And that can be really hard to get if most of the forest land needs to be managed for saw timber. So there's a push to allow for more land to be managed in a way that can achieve old forest conditions while being enrolled. And there's just a lot of discussion and real questions about how to do that effectively while supporting the forest economy and recognizing that the rural economy is hugely dependent on the use value appraisal program. And there are a lot of landowners who may be really interested in not managing their forest land. And would that put pressure in different aspects of the economy in a way that could bite us on the other side? And so the legislature is interested in that. We really support the expansion of old forests in the state in a thoughtful way. How we do that in UVA isn't as clear, but it's the conversation is continuing on that, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So I think something's going to move in that in the near future.
Okay, well, it looks like we're over time. So if there are any questions we've missed, I'll try and shoot them to Keith and see if we can answer them. I will send out a link to the recording and some of the links that were typed into the chat, so everybody will have those in a few days. And we want to thank you all for joining us this evening and hope you were able to pull some information out of here. And again, if you have any other questions, you're welcome to email Keith. If you have any other thoughts for coverts, I'm happy to take your email as well. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.